So, Mr. Hoorigan, which is the best achievement of the bank today?
Look, I think that the bank has recovered the confidence of depositors, is the expression of the most obvious achievement. But look, I think being back with a market share that's growing in deposits, a market share that's being sustained and growing in loans, being listed in London, being all capital controls and protections around the depositor base being lifted, no distractions of overseas ownership of a variety of businesses that perhaps we should never have owned, the combination of the two banks and their IT systems, the tightening up of procedures. I mean, there's a lot of little things. I think to single one thing out is to do a disservice to the jigsaw that we've been putting together over the course of the last 1,200 days.
Mm-hmm. In view of the new standards regarding banks capitalization, do you consider that BOC is capitalized?
I think BOC is adequately capitalized for the risk it runs. This is a judgment we have to take every year. If we make progress with last year's capital and we can look back and say that's good progress, then we reassess for this year. It's a year-on-year thing, but I believe Bank of Cyprus carries the right level of capital at this stage for the risk it runs. We recapitalized it, you might remember, with a further $1 billion, mm-hmm. So it was a very calculated number. We passed the comprehensive assessment in November 2014 by a small margin. Risk has come down from there. We've taken more than $2 billion of incremental provision charges and still have capital in the bank sufficient to look forward. So look, I think we are adequately capitalized for the risk we're running, but we have to keep making progress to make sure that's the case.
You have any more plans of securitization?
Yeah, look, we're definitely going to have, 50% of our balance sheet remains in the category of non-performing loans. So we will attack all avenues of how we reduce that risk and make the bank more normal.
Are you going to, let's say, sell off your bad loans?
We will we'll look at those, but provided it's good value for our shareholders. I mean, to date, we've had 10 quarters of material de-risking of the non-performing loans by doing consensual foreclosures, actual foreclosures, some write-offs in extreme cases, and of course some settlement and restructuring. But that's delivering pace at 3% of GDP per quarter, which is pretty big in the context of every other bank in Europe, but not enough given the sheer size of the non-performing loan stack we've got. So we're going to look at selling off some portions, provided I get reasonable value. We're not a distressed seller in the context of having to sell those loans, but it would be nice to finish the job earlier. So yes, we're going to look at doing that.
So if we see a bit more the bad loans, the non-performing ones, where do you see that we go wrong? And I mean, so little so far are being achieved.
Well, I think we should be honest in the sense that we have achieved huge amounts, but the problem was so big that there's still another huge amount to go. So in the last 18 months, we've taken 22% of GDP off our balance sheet. That in the context of Europe is enormous. The next bank in Europe, and I mean including all banks, is UniCredit in Italy, which did 1.6% of GDP in its context. So Cyprus is making great progress.
On the other hand, the existing ones are still big.
Oh, no, look, I think that the stack, we were at 63% of our balance sheet. We've just gone to 49% of our balance sheet. We want to get below 10, right, over time. So we still have a huge amount to go. And actually, we're making good progress on that. But people's patience, as the crisis goes into our rear-view mirror, diminishes. Our own sort of patience to keep doing this quarter after quarter after quarter diminishes. But as you make the problem smaller, you start to be able to explore different opportunities to tackle the problem.
So are you about to go after people that they are not paying?
Well, we certainly are. I mean, I think 3 years after a crisis, it's time for society to behave as one, which is let's make sure that we have a functioning banking system.
Even if it's someone who lost his job.
No, look, I mean,
he has a house with 2 kids. And
look, there's a rhetoric around this which is often very populist. In the example of a 6-bedroomed house with a swimming pool and 2 Mercedes-Benz parked in the driveway, and someone decides not to pay their loan, and the house was 600,000. Of course, we're going to go after that person. They could live in a smaller house. They could drive 2 smaller cars. They could put 4 kids into 2 bedrooms instead of into 4. We have to be a bit more honest about this debate. Someone who's lost their job living in a modest house which cost a modest amount of money where they're receiving help from the state in any case is not our target audience for people we're going to go after to foreclose. Now, we do need to find a problem answer to that, because if we don't find an answer to that, then it's very hard for me in the future to lend to homes below a certain level, to people in a certain socioeconomic category, and we create different moral hazards. So we do have to resolve that. But look, we have 1,600 foreclosures in the pipeline today, and we will pursue those to the end of the legal route. But we also are saying to all of those people where we've issued foreclosures on, please come in and talk to us, because it's probably a better answer if you cooperate with us than there is by not cooperating with us. But I think our patience and that of societies should be diminishing.
So are you happy with the new legislation and all the things that our MPs, all the tools that gave you the Parliament?
Yeah, look, it took a long time to be put in place, and we lost, I think, 18 months, which we should not have lost, but this is behind us. The tools we have today are sufficient. We've reduced the ability up from 15 years to something more like 8 to 20 months to foreclose on an asset if we have to. We've replaced what I describe as the marshmallow hammer with a steel hammer, so we have a credible threat with a short time frame. We also have good legislation in place which allows people to, if they give their assets in consensual debt forgiveness, that there are good tax incentives, and I won't bankrupt them. So there's definitely enough tools in the pipeline, both legislatively and tax incentive-wise, for people to want to come and do a deal with the bank. So I'm happy with the law as it sits today.
On the other hand, are you about to increase lending into the economy?
We're trying to. We did just over $1 billion of lending last year into Cyprus.
Because without that, you will agree that we cannot go.
Yeah, there's never been a sustained recovery without credit into an economy. But we did 845 million euros of lending into Cyprus in the first half of this year. That is accelerating. You know, we think we'll do nearly twice what we did last year. So we are providing credit. You know, at 6% of GDP last year, we think it'll be more like 10% of GDP this year. So we are providing the credit that the economy needs to recover. But of course, a recovery in an economy takes two things. It takes capital, which we're providing recovery on for expansion of working capital cycles, for people to invest in businesses. But it also needs labor productivity. So as unemployment comes down, the need for us to make sure we have a more flexible workforce will become into our sights as we head into 2019. And I think that that's the one thing Cyprus missed the opportunity in the crisis in doing, was proper labour law reform to make sure we have a more flexible, more malleable workforce. And that's something we're going to have to tackle as we go forward.
Okay, so it's been an enormous discussion about the passport policy. What do you think about it?
Look, I think all of these things are positive to the economy. It is right that a small nation like Cyprus advantages itself, just like every other European nation, in bringing capital into the country and saying to someone, if you bring your real hard-earned foreign direct investment into our country, we will honour you by allowing you to become part of our wider citizenship. That's okay. We're talking about small number of thousands of the population. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people. This is a good thing for Cyprus. Now, the labelling of it and the marketing of it and the abuse of it has to be very carefully regulated. Otherwise, we draw the wrong type of attention, and we certainly don't want the wrong type of people in the Citizens Programme. But the idea that someone would bring a couple of million into Cyprus, unlevered, and help the country move forward by either buying property or investing in businesses over a period of time under defined criteria is a good thing.
On the other hand, they're buying something in order to keep it or to sell it back.
Well, look, you've got to...
And create another problem then.
Look, you've got to create rules. Now, the one thing is that these properties are not levered, so they don't cause me a problem. So if someone's buying an expensive Limassol apartment and putting $2 million into it...
so there is not a back-to-back loan?
No, we're not lending into those schemes. They are mostly deleveraging developers who are over-levered, or they're going into the economy in a different way. Now, of course, that creates a two-speed economy, so you've got things bought and maybe trading between passport holders, and we have to avoid that. What we have to try and make sure is that the investment that comes into the country to benefit the country rather than to create a revolving door of ownership. So I think that it will be sensible for the government to tighten the scheme as we go forward, and I think there are already plans under contemplation to do that. So
why do you think we're under the microscope in other countries?
Well, look, this country has been under the microscope.
It's called jealousy?
Look, I think small countries with high-profile things come under the microscope because they've been under the microscope for a long period of time. I mean, you know, Cyprus has been under the microscope for its standards in lending, its standard in transaction management, you know, its citizenship scheme. It's a small country at the edge of Europe. It had a bail-in. in history the politicians perhaps didn't get to the answer quickly enough and caused themselves to come more into the limelight than might have been the case had we behaved in a different way earlier. It is what it is. I don't think we should overanalyze the fact that Cyprus, for a lot of reasons, is in the limelight for the wrong reasons. And what we have to do is keep increasing our standards and keep preaching the facts and try and make sure that the facts outspeak the rhetoric. And that takes time.
You know, there are a lot of people that think that specific law firms are with the one or the other way giving orders to the banks, and especially to this bank, in order to give or not to give passports and everything. Well, loans for passports, actually.
This is 100% not true. You know, we don't take any instructions from any law firms. We have introducers as customers. They go through the AML and KYC and US Patriot Act standards that we've introduced. We shut down 90% of all introducers over the last 3 years. We've lost billions of turnover by not willing to do certain types of business. We hold ourselves to all the standards that FATCA, CRS, the US Patriot Act and all of the directives of the European Union hold us to. And we think that is a positive, sensible thing for us to do in building back both the reputation of the bank, but also the country.
Okay. Now, you said something about London. What is happening with your assets in London?
So we have a small bank in the UK. It's about $1.5 billion in balance sheet size. You know, it's 5% of the group's overall assets. We have about 450 people there. We're building a nice business around the original sort of Cyprus emigrant community from the 70s. Mm-hmm. We've expanded that to be a bank for entrepreneurs in a wider sort of sense in the UK. And that's resonating well with business people, and we think we can build a nice, safe, well-run bank there from the beginnings of something that's, you know, not too profitable, but will be over time.
So you believe it will become profitable?
Yeah, it is profitable today. It has very low credit losses. It makes it reasonable, but it's expensive. You have to build a business to a certain size before it becomes something that you actually can regard as valuable. So that's in build. We're very happy with the progress. We've fundamentally changed most of the management. We've changed most of the disciplines around how that business is working, and we like what we see so far. We think we've got a good opportunity, irrespective of Brexit and all of the other noise that exists around the UK.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask also about the bad debts. So you think that you will stop writing bad debts?
No, look, a bank that takes no risk is not a bank. So we will, of course, continue to take sensible risk, given all of the information we have on how the bank and its customer base has behaved over the last 20, 30, 40 years. We had a structural break in this economy in 2013, and that was caused broadly because we lent the wrong way. We lent against collateral. We didn't look enough at cash. We didn't have proper security in place. And, of course, the country went through its own sort of problems. All of that contributed to a significant structural break in the economy. Now, what had been happening in our bank over 20 years was NPLs had been building slowly over every quarter over a very long period of time. And our bank was already a 20% NPL bank before the crisis, which, by the way, would have still put it way up the league tables in terms of European...
So the history will write that for Cyprus it was a bank sector corruption?
I'm not using the word corruption. I think some of the lending practices were clearly evident well before the crisis, that we were building up non-performance in our balance sheet over a very long period of time. And then we added another 40 to 50% to it on the day the crisis broke, when 50% of GDP and deposits were destroyed, when everyone sort of had this huge cardiac arrest of confidence, where bail-ins occurred, you know, where the capital controls were put in place both domestically and internationally. And then people got used to not paying their loans properly. Now, that is a result of a whole lot of things over a long period of time, exacerbated by the country's own problems. What we've been trying to do is change the nature of how we lend. Better security documentation, better covenants, more analysis of how people can afford to repay their loans, and only looking at cash 2 or 3 times first before we look at the security against which you lend. I mean, if I'm looking at the value of your security for my recovery, then I've already burned through the basics of good banking, which is, can you afford to repay the loan that you're taking out? And what people also forget is that, you know, a bank has about 15% capital, or thereabouts. And every time I lend you €100, I lend you 85 cents deposits. And they've been someone else's savings. So our job is to create the sort of your ability to borrow from your future earnings from a little old lady who's been saving all her money in Omados or wherever she lives.
So actually you're trying to protect the savings of people.
Yeah, banks can't afford to have huge losses because their capital bases are levered generally. And good banking over a long period of time is about good disciplines.
But if you find yourself in another country with the same problem as Cyprus had, would you suggest bail-in now that you're wiser and you see what's happening on the ground?
Look, I'd suggest a lot of things before I'd suggest that, but I am a little offended when I look around Europe and I see that Cyprus got treated in a certain way, and other countries and other banks in particular who have had similar issues have not suffered the same consequences for their depositors. Now, I would never want to see a depositor bail-in more generally, but I would have preferred to see more state action in help of, or supranational action in help of Cyprus. I look at Banco Espírito Santo in Spain, and they had a problem of similar size caused by an Angolan issue. They were not bailed in. I see Greece lurch repeatedly from crisis to crisis, borrowing ELA in what I would describe as a bank walk, not a bank run, and of course no bail-in. Now would I wish a bail-in on the Greek people? Absolutely not. But do I think the Cyprus people were treated, fairly harshly in that context? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Are there any tools that you need in order to do a better job, and you expect something from the government, any government, or the parliament?
Look, I mean,
or any other institution?
We've had a very good partnership so far with the administration that has put in, and the parliament, who have put in place a sufficient level of laws for us to be able to operate. Now, what we need is to have as much stability as possible in that legislation, and we need to have the rhetoric toned down so we can make sure the foreign direct investment into the country is continued to be attracted. And of course I worry about the upcoming presidential election campaigns with all of the desires for people to differentiate themselves. And we have to make sure that the rhetoric is not excessively populist, because if it is excessively populist, we will damage the ability for us to go faster. Mm-hmm. So I need people to actually recognize that there's a collective responsibility for us here to create mood music in the country that allows us to continue to perform at least the pace we've been doing so far, but hopefully at a faster pace. And we are going to look at a couple of techniques to try and accelerate the finish here. But I won't be able to do that if people sort of start the usual banker bashing that goes on prior to an election, and where they begin to just make statements that are irresponsible because they allow people who are able to pay not to pay. Mm-hmm. So we need to just stability and good rhetoric.
So which is the biggest goal for the bank for the next weeks or months?
Look, we are focused on trying to accelerate the finish the job on non-performing loans. Unless we do that, everything else is sort of paint on the wrong thing. We have the liability side of our balance sheet is in good shape. Companies on the London Stock Exchange and poised, provided we make good progress, to step up to premium. The bank is doing reasonably well in its digital transformation, which is well underway. The bank is now 125 branches. It was 203 when we started this journey. We have all of the little pieces are being put in place. But if we don't finish the job on non-performing loans, and we don't all collectively start to hold people who don't repay their loans but can repay their loans to account, then we will be held back from achieving those goals soon. So we are focused on making sure we finish the job on the asset side of the balance sheet to match the repair we've already done on the liability side of the balance sheet.
Thank you very much. Thank you.